should join us any second.
Yes, Russ will be joining us any minute. Hello, folks. How you doing? Let me get my. There you are. Hi. Okay, so yes, I love people because I just posted my article and I got to finally use the headline that I've been waiting to use forever called "Hitches Be Crazy." Okay, so I finally got a chance to use it. I'm really excited about that. So I've used my Hitches Be Crazy headline, and then I said, a source I talked to this morning said Toronto and San Jose are watching this whole situation closely, that both of those two teams might have some interest in Hitchcock, right? That was my gist of my story. No big deal, not earth-shattering, probably. Jeez, sorry, hold on. Kill that thing. Quit. Hold on.
Oh, and San Jose and Toronto, I guess, make some sense. And
yeah. Okay, stop. Sorry.
I'll give you my theory after.
Frig. Stop. There. Sorry. Okay. So I wrote this. Hate when that happens. And it's fine. And the good thing is, like I've said before, they did a study recently on the internet, on Twitter, where they had some people ask for help. Like, I desperately need help. Someone give me a call. Someone respond if you've ever had, a disease like this, or if you've ever known anybody who had. It was something just basic, and it was something that everybody would want to help with. And then they did another, and they put out like a 10,000 tweets of this, and they got, like 500 people responding, wanting to help or whatever. And then the next tweet they did 10,000 tweets that had a basic, simple typo in it, just like something that that was obviously like a word that was spelled slightly wrong, or just completely screwed up. And 10,000 of those, and they got 2,500 responses to it. Just showing how the internet works, right? So you have 2,500 people who are willing to tell you you're wrong if you make a typo, and 500 people willing to help you if you really need help. So today, in my article, because I was writing quickly and trying to getting onto the show here, I wrote, that waiting in the wings for Hitchcock may be Toronto and St. Louis, instead of San Jose, because it's just quickly, obviously Hitchcock, San Jose. This is a mistake we can make. And I changed it faster than I could think. I went in literally because I reread it, and I posted. I'm like, damn it, I changed it. And by the time I had changed it, 5 people had already
jumped on you. Yeah.
Commented. And the one that I liked the most was this one, which I'm just going to bring it up to him because he's hopefully watching now, and hopefully I wanted to show him how much I appreciated it. He said to me in the comments, he said, "This error means nothing can be taken seriously from Eck ever again." So I just want to. And I said, you're exactly right. That's definitely true. That error means nothing to me. So that's why I just want to say I love people.
Re-invite Russ. He didn't get the invite.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, should I give us
go ahead.
Brief musical interlude as we celebrate the departure of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams from the NHL playoff scene.
And then I'll tell you a good story, Eklund.
Okay, I want to hear a good story. The Senator logo looks a little bit sadder today. Singing the blues. It's a ridiculous mascot anyway, but that's okay. It's a penguin. A Canuck is not a fish in any way, shape, or form, but that's okay.
And finally,
and last but not least, proof that an American Indian will take down the saber-toothed tiger. The Nashville Predators are gone. There you go.
Sorry about that.
No, I appreciate it.
Anyway, so I'm always saddened by the comment section of websites because it seems to suggest that we're living in a society where people are mean-spirited and uncaring, to say the least.
Yeah.
And I was driving to Pittsburgh the last time I was there for the playoffs, and I traveled along the Ohio Turnpike, and I stopped to get a beverage for the road, a little Coke from McDonald's, and I was walking up to the door, and behind me I sensed there was someone coming up, and I turned, and it was an elderly woman who was in a walker who was, 25 or 30 yards behind me. So I waited, and I held the door for her, and she stopped and put her hand on my arm and said, she says, I watch the news all the time, she said, and I just feel like we're living in just such a horrible place. And then when I get out in my walker, she said, people all the time stop to help me. And she says, when I'm out in my walker, I believe that this is still a great place to live. And I said, yeah, it really actually is. And I said, the thing about the news is it's just a snapshot.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to tell myself about the comment section, that it's still just a bunch of angry people who feel empowered, who get on there and just like to be mean-spirited. They can't just say, hey, I caught this typo. They've got to indict your character and your ancestry and whatever else they got on their mind that day. So the elderly woman made my day by telling me that she still believes in that America's still a good place to be.
I love that story. That's a good story, and it's absolute. I think that's great.
Well, along the lines of what you were just discussing, I believe it was a Long Island television station made the error that said, after the Islanders had won in Game 6, that might not be the last game in Nassau at Nassau Coliseum because the two teams could come back for a Game 8. And I hate to tell them that it's a 7-game series, folks.
Yeah, that's right, and that's this happens.
No, okay, it's a silly error, but everybody jumped on it like it was like a crime. I mean, just so what? I mean, big deal.
I mean, the first person who responded in my thing was like, "There's an error in here. I think you mean San Jose, not St. Louis." I'm like, "That's cool.
That's what you want to read.
That's nice."
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
And that I have no problem with that, but then the others are like, and no one, it all overshadowed my title, which I've been waiting to use forever. Hitches be crazy. So I mean, it completely. That's okay. We're gonna stay with it for now. Anyway, there's Russ. Hello, Russ.
Hey guys.
Yeah, Jeremy Roenick said yesterday on at the NBC, if you were watching that game between periods, that he felt like it's not a done deal that Hitch would be out of there. He thought it would be a huge mistake. So. I've seen other stories that suggest that they've got to decide now whether it's Hitch or the players they have to go. But, to be honest, it's generally almost always the coach. It's a lot easier to change the coach.
Well, Kevin, I think
let's start the show and talk about this. This is where we should start. I want to start here. This is perfect. Okay, so today is the 27th. Oh, good Lord.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure.
Your Apple Watch told you that?
My Apple Watch told me that.
I think my wife's interested in that Apple Watch. She stopped to watch the commercial for that. So
it's very cool.
That's how you tell, Kev?
Well, yeah, because
no, you feel very much. It's very futuristic. Like when you get a call, you can talk into it like like you're in some sort of spy movie. That's really fun. The best thing about it is just the fact that it, when you're around the house or the office and you have your phone plugged in. And you just have to go get you go to the restroom or you just go get a coffee or perhaps, go take the dog for a walk and then in the back. And you don't have to take your phone with you, which is what's nice because your texts and your calls just come up on this. So that's what I like about it. Just leaving your phone and just being able to just get up and go. Like I'm so tethered to, I'm going to go outside. Well, I better grab my phone and take it with me outside and,
Swatch made one like that. I had it about 7-8 years ago without a phone. It was really good until all of a sudden they stopped supporting the Wi-Fi that would come in and give you all your data, but otherwise it was great for like 5 years.
Yeah, I mean it's a really nice thing. I mean there's others that are out there just as good as it. The Android. It's not way better than Android. Like usually Apple comes out with something that's way ahead of everything else. It's not way better than Android. It's right there with Android. But it's maybe slightly better. It's nice. I mean it's cute. There's some cute things you can do with it. But it's it's the first version of it. Obviously, will get a lot better. There's no reason to kill yourself and go out and get one. I think it's going to get a lot better soon. So, but eventually, I do think it's one of those things. Like it feels like one of those things that we'll all have. Like it feels.
What's $450?
Right now, I think the cheapest is like $320. But that'll come down. It's like they'll get it under. It'll be like $149 at some point. That kind of thing.
Yeah, some of them are as expensive as a Rolex, and I'm like, that's going a bit too far.
Well, some of them are made of gold, which is ridiculous. They're like, it's a collector's piece, but yeah, but this is technology. It's like it's obsolete in a year, so you're gonna collect an obsolete watch. That's like, I mean, it's not just a gold Rolex is something you pass down through the generations. You know,
I mean, I have,
but it works.
yeah. I have my
There you go.
I have my grandfather's watch that he had since the early 1900s, and what is my grandkids are going to say? Here's my granddad's Apple Watch.
Yeah, right.
It just doesn't do the same thing for
It's
me.
like,
I'm
what's
sorry.
an iPhone? You know, I mean, these things aren't going to be. These are fleeting things. So it's a little bit. I don't know.
I can't believe the sound quality of my granddad's 8-track.
Right. Like right now, there's a huge take-up. My son is totally got it. Just completely threw me for a loop. His new hobby is collecting vinyl albums and playing them on his record player. Like I gave him an old record player that's a tiny little record player that has speakers built into it, and now he's going out and taking, instead of buying Pokemon, he's buying like old Beatles records and old Elvis records, and he's playing these, and he's playing them all the time, and it's awesome. You know, it's really cool. And it's amazing how there's a whole industry now. There are places, stores in the mall that are opening up that are record stores again.
Yeah, it's a real trendy thing. You know, both two of my adult kids both have, they're collecting vinyl and player and stuff. So
Yeah, but it's now special vinyl. It's the heavier vinyl. They want, what is it, the 160 gram, or I don't know the weight of it, but yeah, the 160 gram LP.
I'm not smoking it, Mike. I don't know.
Wow.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
Okay.
No, but but he's collecting the old ones too, and I think you're right. And but this, the funny thing to me is this, that it's like there's an obvious thing going on. You know, my son's like, well, what's the next big thing? What happened after records? I'm like, well, after records came cassette tapes, and there's no way in hell cassette tapes are coming back. I mean, that's a technology that was so
eight tracks were before cassettes.
Yeah, 8-tracks are not coming back.
No, they were so flawed. I mean, there's the people who can argue that vinyl sounds better, but the funny thing about it is the new record players they're selling for these vinyl things are horribly lo-fi. Like they're making these they have like little
they're
like $50, but there's suitcases basically open up. And they have little speakers on the front, and that they're lo-fi as it is, so they're feeding into the whole lo-fi thing.
Just so the younger people understand how flawed 8-tracks were, there was always at least one song on the 8-track that got separated from track 1 to track 2, and it was annoying.
I was just gonna say, I remember listening to Frampton Comes Alive, and Do You Feel Like I Do was always part 1 and part 2,
Right.
from track 3 to 4. Like I was waiting for the LP to where's the break?
Right.
There wasn't a break.
Isn't that so funny? I mean, and I remember records. You remember records from the skips you had on them too, don't you? I mean, every time I hear certain songs, I expect them to skip, still to this day.
That or mixtapes. When you got mixtapes from a friend of yours, you always expected like Bloody Well Right from Supertramp to follow Awakened by Yes, because I heard that on that tape for a decade.
Right.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because we had between my wife and I, we had a whole collection of albums that just sat there for years and years and years until my adult children both got into vinyl and old LPs, and then they went through it. It was like a treasure trove for them. They
I know.
sorted through. They sort of divided up my Beatles albums and everything that we had. So it's been fun. Actually, my wife now is sort of back into playing our old LPs. What few we have left, now we're gonna have to go out and buy them.
Right. And you can buy, and they're printing new versions of them. And there's old versions too, and it's but the funny thing was, my dad was such an audiophile that I had the great, like the Marantz record player and all these really top-notch record players. So I would remember records getting better and better quality, and then when CDs came along, my dad was like, "Well, forget this. This just blows it out of the water." But I've been trying and now that they've gone exactly the opposite. Record players they're going for low quality, and just But he doesn't care. He loves it. He thinks it's so cool to put a record on. He just thinks it's the greatest thing in the world.
And some of these artists are starting to re-release everything on LP because for a way of making money. I know that Genesis just is releasing all their albums on LP.
Really?
Because nobody's buying CDs anymore. Nobody's buying songs because they can download it off of YouTube or get it.
Right. I had that cool moment when I walked into my son sitting there on his bed, and he's got the album jacket open of the Beatles Red album. That was like 1962 to 65.
Right.
And he's looking through lyrics on the big, and I'm like, there you go. I mean, it was right out of I lived that exact moment, and just it's like It was cool. That was really cool.
Yeah,
So-
so
He wasn't drinking or doing anything else, so that's good.
No,
So-
I wasn't doing anything else that I did back then.
it's
But
cool.
We'll have our music podcast. I mean, our music webcast next Monday at 9
he's
a.m.
only 10. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's right.
It's even cooler when you have memories of the Beatles actually appearing on the Ed Sullivan. I actually remember that. And the other thing too is like nobody pays enough attention to like the old 45s in the jacket themselves. They were so cool. Like you know, for Christmas, because my kids were into it, and you look for ways to give unique gifts. I've gone out and bought, you know, on eBay some of the old 45s for the Beatles. And
I have this hanging on my wall.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and that's how I remember the Beatles coming out. You know, going to buying the 45s at the you know, at the Kresge's at the downtown Wayne, Michigan Kresge's.
I didn't like 45s because of the crappy sound quality, but I inherited my dad's 78s, and we were playing some of them, and some of them would just literally disintegrate when you took them out of the jacket because they were so heavy.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. See, my era is a little bit beyond that, past that, because I wasn't. The Beatles were sort of gone by the time I was cognizant of this stuff. But I did have a 45 collection that was really big, but it all spans over like 1 6-month period. So it's really funny. Like it's a very specific time. It's like when Lindsey Buckingham released Trouble. Remember? It's like right in there, right in that era. You know, like ELO's Twilight. Centerfold by Jay Giles Band. They're all like in that like one era that I have all those 45s.
I'm ashamed of some of the singles that I bought. We'll recount that in another time, but it's,
for sure. All right, let's get going. Speaking of music, we'll talk about the blues. Here we go. Hey, Hockey World, how you doing? It's April 27th. It's Monday, the year 2015.
I'm Michael Agello.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
And I'm Kevin Allen, the music critic for USA Today. No, I'm not.
And I am Peter Gabriel, and you're watching the HockeyBuzzCast on HockeyBuzz.com. I am Eklund. You're watching the HockeyBuzzCast on HockeyBuzz.com. This is the podcast that comes to you Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. or thereabouts to teach you the goings-on, or not teach you, but talk about the goings-on in the world of hockey. Teaching you is the other show. Yeah, and so we have, since we last talked, a lot of teams have been eliminated. It was elimination weekend, sort of. A lot of good games, of course. But let's start with the two teams that were unfairly eliminated in my mind: the Predators and the Blues. That was just it. It's really a shame that both these teams had to face the kind of teams they had to face. But let's start in St. Louis, because I think that is the most interesting of them all. And rumors say about Hitchcock and what's going to happen with him next. Kevin, you mentioned before it's not, Bronick had said it wasn't a done deal on TV, that Hitcho's gone. What are your thoughts? Do you think Hitchcock?
Well, I mean, I think what Bronick was actually just saying is, like, first of all, he just didn't think that Hitchcock should pay a price for that. And, he thought that they could decide to keep him. I don't think he was suggesting he had any inside knowledge. Right. But saying all that, I mean, 3 consecutive first-round exits and only one playoff series win since he took over. Also, we've been through 4 years in his last 2 stops in Philadelphia and in Columbus. He only lasted 4 seasons. There's always, fair or unfair, there's always a discussion about the expiration date that comes with Ken Hitchcock. Yeah, he's a tough coach. He certainly pushes his players. He pushes all the buttons. He's tough to deal with, and at some point they do grow weary of his coaching style. So when you factor all that in, I think you reach a conclusion that he's in serious jeopardy, and that maybe, I think all of us feel that there's enough ability there to win a cup, and especially to me, the most damning evidence is the fact that usually the missing piece is, they're not geared to play playoff hockey. But this Blues team is really geared to play playoff hockey. They're really difficult to play against. They have size. They have aggressiveness. They can push you a little bit. So, now you're left wondering, and then you factor in the goaltending decision. It seemed to me, I was on St. Louis radio just before the series, and I had the sense the people, the masses, wanted Elliott in that. That was just my perception, right or wrong. I don't know. I think people are going to second guess that he went with an inexperienced goalie now that they weren't successful. But here's the sad point: if you're a Hitchcock backer, and I think Hitchcock's a good coach, and I really enjoy dealing with him, as Russ will attest, and you can attest too.
Oh,
He's
He's
wonderful to talk to all the time. He can talk about anything.
He's amazing.
But he was playing a really good team. Like, the Wild could win it all.
I know.
It's not like they had any reward for finishing where they did. Their reward was they got to face the hottest team in hockey. On a winning percentage basis, the Wild were the best team. So it's probably a little unfair to blame this on Hitchcock, but that's the nature of the beast. And I think he, probably is going to get called into the office, and he may come out without a job. I mean, I don't know that, but and anyone who looks at the history. But here's the bottom line: if that does indeed happen, he's going to end up with one of these coaching vacancies just because of history.
Yeah, I mean, Eck listed Toronto and San Jose as two possibles. And then Kevin, I said with the connections to Hockey Canada and Bob Nicholson and Peter Chiarelli, that I wouldn't doubt possibly Edmonton as a possibility for Hitchcock. But with St. Louis, last year they were beset by injuries. This year they weren't. Last year they were, they had limited offense. The offense was a concern. This year they get the Schwartz, Laterra, Tarasenko line added to the group that they already had. Added Stastny. Tarasenko had a wonderful playoff. He scored I think 5 or 6 goals. So that wasn't a concern. I mean, I think it comes down, and I don't want to put the entire weight on Jake Allen and that being the difference, but Minnesota was a good team and they didn't have strong goaltending, so I think it's a factor. Maybe what's needed here is, maybe they needed a new voice, but also maybe they do need as well a change in the chemistry of the locker room. I know that there are going to be a number of teams out there shopping players this summer, and then depending on what the salary cap does, that there are teams that are going to be looking to trade players. So I mean, maybe they just need a new voice or a new presence in that locker room to help them get to the next step.
Russ, what do you think?
Well, I think Kitch is getting a raw deal in the sense that those goalies weren't his. They were the only guys he had to use. He tried to get Ryan Miller. He was too old, right? And so Doug Armstrong has sort of saddled him with these two goalies that maybe neither are good enough. And so that's one thing. Another thing is, did Hitch Cohen ask to sign Paul Stastny? I'm not sure, but he's been a big flop there so far. And a lot of people felt like him going there was not going to be the greatest move for him because he was better suited for where he was in Colorado, but he was making less money there. So he went for money. So I think that has hurt the dynamic of the Blues as much as anything else. And look, I could blame Jake Allen too because that was a bad goal, and I probably would have taken him out after that first one. But at the end of the day, Hitch was just using what he had. I mean, he doesn't draft these guys. He didn't sign these guys. And so while they have a tremendous defense, and they do, and they have good offensive players, they're still missing it in net. And this is a team that hasn't made it to the Cup in 40 years, right? We talked about it. Glenn Hall and Jacques Plante were their goalies the last time they made a Stanley Cup appearance. So it can't be all Ken Hitchcock's fault either. And so there's some sort of losing mentality in St. Louis that has to change. And I think it's got to change from the players. I don't think Hitch – look, he could get fired and someone could come in, and that'll probably happen, like Kevin said. But I don't think that's going to necessarily help him this time.
This isn't – yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I just need a 10-second rebuttal. I mean, the only thing I would say is we don't have any idea whether Elliott's any good. I mean, he's never really gotten an opportunity. Like it just never seemed to have any faith in him. And during the regular season, he got the opportunity, and I thought he was going to get it in the postseason, but it just, it really didn't happen. So, that's the only thing I would say about that. But I think your point is well taken. I mean, they've not had that presence, that high-profile goalie. That's the one thing they haven't had. But other teams have been successful without that high-profile goalie.
They have been, but this is the difference, in my opinion, is that the Blues haven't done anything to give these guys any sense of confidence that they believe in them. Like that's the big thing. Like usually you can have a non-high-profile goalie, like Anthony Emmy's the always the classic example they bring up, right? But Niemi was absolutely the starter of that Blackhawks team. He was the guy, and he was the guy they went with. Remember, they brought in Marty Brodeur this year at one point. Last year they brought in Ryan Miller, and they've continually questioned these guys. I mean, and so neither of them has all the confidence in the world to think that they are the number one. I mean, I think Elliott deserves a better shake. I completely agree with you there.
See, I mean, I've never been the biggest of Elliott fans. I do grant you that he probably deserved to be the one to get the start in the playoffs. But if they go outside of the organization for their answers this summer, it's just question marks. I mean, Niemi is an unrestricted free agent. He didn't play very well in San Jose. You could trade for a guy like Jonathan Bernier, but there are questions of whether he's a number one goaltender, and maybe in front of a better defense and a better core of forwards he would be. Do you trade for Vasilevsky? Do you trade for Jimmy Howard? I mean, if Mrazek is the number one in Detroit, there's all question marks there. So I don't know if there is an answer there for the Blues in terms of a goaltender.
I say this: Paul Stastny had 1 point, 1 goal in 6 games.
Yeah,
that's abominable. That is not Hitchcock's fault.
No, it's not Hitch's fault. He was okay during the year, though. I mean, he was.
He had 46 points. It's not great.
Yeah, it's not great, but what he brings to the table is, Paul Stastny brings a lot of intangibles to the table. Right? He's a great face-off guy. He's a really smart, intelligent player. He's from St. Louis too, and you always wonder about that, like that. Mm-hmm. When a guy's from the town, you wonder about the extra pressures on that player to play in that town. Like, that they night after night their friends are looking for tickets, things like that. I've talked to guys who don't want to play in their hometowns because of that specific reason. They just say, I don't want to have to deal with that every night. I wondered about that, whether or not, because they've wanted him there for a long time. And
Stastny, they understood once Laterra was signed as well, and they already had David back, is that, they had 3 centers. There wasn't the same. He wasn't going to get the same opportunities there. He's probably overpaid for what they got out of him, but I think for the most part, he did what they expected him to do. He was very good defensively. He is a good face-off guy. As Zach said, he's a very, very smart player. But to your point, I think you're just trying to say that Armstrong's fingerprints are on this as well. Like he's put in the personnel I mean, in half the cases more, the coaches, it's really unfair that they get fired.
Yeah.
I mean,
and how much better can the St. Louis Blues be? I mean, let's just face the fact that they played the Minnesota Wild, and like you said, Kevin. I mean, this is a team that would have beaten maybe 14 other teams in the first round of the playoffs. I mean, it's possible they could have been favored against anyone, and I'm telling you right now that the Wild are going to beat the Blackhawks. I'm convinced that 100%. Like, I will put my money down on that.
Wait, you're going to bet on that like you're going to bet on the Capitals not making the playoffs?
Absolutely, Russ. And the reason I say this, and we'll get into our playoff preview before, is the Wild play a very similar game to the Predators, and except they do it better. And they have better goaltending right now because Dubnyk has been that good. They have a healthy defense. They have more scoring up front. The Wild are just a better version of the Predators in a lot of ways, I think. And they're both fast, speedy teams. They both like to score off the rush. And I think that we saw that the Hawks had a heck of a time. I mean, the Hawks goalies weren't that good in that series, really, when it all comes down to it. The Predators kind of shot themselves in the foot. I mean, blowing 3-1 lead in the last game, a 3-0 lead earlier in the series. All of that, we'll talk kind of transition into the Predators here from it, because I think that, I really do believe that Shea Weber's injury is the reason that, this series isn't going back to Game 7. I think that in one of those games, Shea Weber makes a difference. They were that close. Overtime games, 1-goal games. They were that close that Weber would have been a factor. Rene just wasn't good. I mean, flat out wasn't good in the series.
Well, I mean, Rene hasn't been great since he came back from the injury. I mean, he's been good.
Yeah.
But he hasn't been great. And he wasn't a difference maker in this series. And when you analyze the series and you say that he wasn't a difference maker when Chicago had to go to Scott Darling for a sizable chunk of the series. And I mean that means Rene really dramatically underachieved. And I'm not laying the groundwork for the blame on Pekka Rene. I still think that the fault obviously is the Weber injury, and the fault is I think that Chicago with their matchup up the middle. Nashville in the summer, I think David Poile has to go out and get himself at least one and maybe two centers, because otherwise in that division going up against what St. Louis has, what Minnesota has with Koivu and Granlund, with Chicago with Taves, and I think Brad Richards is probably going to be gone after this year, but with just Taves, they can't compete, and they need to get a center who can play up against those guys.
Yeah, they do. There's no question about it. I mean, Wilson was very good though. He was very good.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
He was.
yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that I agree with everything Mike just said. I don't think Rennie has been on top of his game since that injury, and we talked beforehand. Just what I had been hearing from other GMs saying, as much as we've been impressed by the Nashville Predators, they're still going into battle with Mike Ribeiro as their number one center.
Yeah. Right.
And that look, he had a great season, very impressive season. But it's just hard for him to compete physically. He's not a big guy.
Yeah.
Against some of the the centers that he has to deal with, and but I still think we're not, which is a common thing in the NHL, is not to give the opposition any credit.
Yeah.
The one thing the Blackhawks do better than anyone else that's still alive is they know how to win.
Yeah. No question about it.
And they know how to hang in there. They have, as my wife always says, excellent survival skills.
They've got a gear that other teams don't have. They have another gear.
Yeah, they just know how to hang in there and find a way to win. And they did that through some pretty poor goalkeeping. And they got a lot of guys who've been there and done that. And right. So I think ultimately that's why I'm struggling. Like I think Minnesota is ready, but boy, the Blackhawks, they won't go down easy.
It's really hard to pick against Blackhawks. I agree.
Yeah.
Here's the thing too. I think with Weber being out, we saw that Yossi is not that Norris guy that maybe his regular season numbers suggested too, because they did drop a little bit on defense. Whereas the Blackhawks, if you took out Keith or Seabrook, they could still survive. And
right.
So that was a big thing too with Nashville. Was I felt like, when Weber was out, I didn't expect them to win anymore. And Rene did look a lot worse without Weber in there, and I think that's a part of it.
That's a big thing, yeah. I disagree on Yossi though. I thought he was fantastic. I don't know, and I thought Ekholm was. I thought Ekholm was unbelievable.
I think the one that was unbelievable was Seth Jones. I agree.
Seth Jones was unbelievable.
I agree with Russ though that I call it the Matt Carl effect. When Roman Yossi is still a good defenseman without Shea Weber.
He's not Matt Carl though.
No.
He's Roman Yossi. He's a lot better than Matt Carl.
No, I'm not saying that, Ak. I'm saying Matt Carl when he played with Chris Pronger looked like an all-star.
Yes.
And then when he went to Tampa, he looked like Matt Carl. So, I mean, Roman Yossi is a fine defenseman. I'm just saying he's not as good without Shea Weber as he is with Shea Weber. That's just a fact.
Well, no one is as good without Shea Weber as they are with Shea Weber.
But I'm with Eck on this one. I mean, Yossi was the MVP at the World Championships a couple of years ago. He's a difference-making defenseman.
Yeah.
He had a better year than Shea Weber. Shea Weber is a great. He was on my Norris Trophy ballot. He's a great defenseman, despite what the analytics say.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can't argue with the statement that he's better with Shea Weber than without. I mean,
we're all better with.
I just wanted her to bark outside.
Yeah.
Don't try to argue.
No, they can't.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, you really can't argue that. I mean, because he's just a great defenseman. But Yossi is, I didn't buy the Matt Carl analogy because that's a completely different thing. Yossi alone is still pretty good.
Yeah. No, he is. I think so too. And Seth Jones. I mean, this was the definite coming out party for Seth Jones. I mean, he was really. This was his. I mean, you watch him in this and you wonder. You go back to the whole Nathan McKinnon versus Seth Jones debates, right? They just come back in your head. I mean, who's the better player? It's so hard to say. I mean,
the problem with that is, and Russ can speak to this too. Everybody knows you got to take the top pairing defensemen. They're harder to find, but the romance of the scorer is always too great. It's so hard to overcome, even though you can convince yourself that your team needs the top pairing defenseman more. But it's still hard that that center is sitting there, especially a speedy center like McKinnon.
Yep.
You can see like the wind. It's just hard to pass him up. Like even if Seth Jones ends up winning 5 Norris trophies, I still would never fault Patrick Waugh for taking McKinnon just because I know that's.
Yeah.
And we're going to have that same debate at the draft in June because you're going to have those teams that aren't going to consider Hannafin, but are they going to take Hannafin or take Strome or take Marner or one of one of those
like
forwards?
the new thing, Russ, isn't it? Like the Hannafin. Could Hannafin drop?
He could drop. He could drop a couple spots. There's no doubt. I mean, he could go behind Strome. He could go behind Marner. I mean, it's one of those things, and I've written about it, where you're way out. If you think a guy could be an 80, 85-point guy, what's your defenseman going to be? 40, 45. Now, granted, he's got a tougher job, but that's what sort of has to get weighed out too. And centers and defensemen, that's it. That's everything in the NHL now. You don't even talk about goalies anymore. It's centers and defensemen at draft.
Well, here's the question, and this is really an important question. I mean, Russ, and you're the right guy to ask this to. I mean, don't you think when you look at the Arizona Coyotes that Strome seems like a wiser choice than Hannafin because they have Ekman Larson, already there. I mean, Hannafin's going to be a good, he could be Ryan Suter like, one of those steady guys that can do, pretty good offensively, but will be strong defensively. But you've got some young defensemen, and you need that center up front. I think that's to me, if I'm Arizona, I'm probably leaning towards Strome.
No, I'm the same way with you because they do have Ekman Larson, who is sort of like the next Nick Lidstrom, right? He's got those qualities. And they do have Connor Brown, and they do have some other young defensemen. I look at them and I say, you know what? I've got to take that center too. I mean, because those guys are really hard to find. They are. And you just pointed out with the Blues, not the Blues, with the Predators, that they needed that guy, and maybe they have that guy, like I said, at Fiala in the minors. And so, like, every team needs that one. The Rangers don't have a number 1 center, by the way. Derek Stepan's not a number 1 center. They've been able to work without it, but you have to have a lot of other things right to work without it.
Well, I mean, Connor Murphy and Brandon Gormley, I mean, they strike me as 3-4 defensemen, not as top pairing guys. And when you have, like Kevin said before, when you have a chance to draft a top pairing defenseman, which, Hannafin is supposedly going to be, then I mean, it's a difficult decision. I mean, because Ryan Strome, Dylan Strome, he's got all the tools. The question is, is he fast enough? And there's been that debate. All I know is that Arizona is not one player away, and they with Hannafin, they would have a chance to replace a guy like Yandel, who they traded away this year, and hold on to the guy for 7 or 8 years. So it's a difficult decision for Don Malone.
Yeah, it's a tough call, but man, they got more on defense than they got up front, and we've all can see that their biggest problem is up front.
Yeah,
and
the bigger problem is attracting guys up front too. Like that's the other thing. Like to get like a free agent to go there, right? I mean, that's
they got Domi coming.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, if Arizona is going to draft Hannafin, he's going to be a number 3. I mean, ultimately, that's what he's going to be. And so, like, why am I drafting him to be a number 3 when I do need a number 1 center? That's what you really have to sort of look at, unless you're going to move Ekman Larson, which they're not. And you're not going to make Hannafin a 2, which he's not really set out to be. He's set out to be a number 1 guy. But that's the other thing, too. When you start looking through the draft at guys that look like they can be number 1 guys and aren't, I thought a couple of years ago Dumba had that potential, and maybe he'll get there. He's looked really good now, but he's not a number 1 yet. He got drafted pretty high in the first round. A lot of those guys aren't number 1s, even though they were in other lives, in other leagues. So that's the other thing, too. We talk about him as number 1s, but Ryan McDonough, he wasn't a number 1 in Montreal. They got rid of him because he wasn't tough enough, right? I mean, turned into one. So, you have to think about that.
And Arizona has a lot of forward prospects too: Duclair, Max Domi, Brendan Perlini, Borac. So I think they're loaded in terms of forward prospects and defense. It's going to be who they deem to be the best player available. And also, they're a team that's going to have so much cap room to get to the cap floor that teams that are in cap situations like, say, Chicago with a guy like Patrick Sharp who they may have to trade, or other teams that are close to the cap, Arizona is going to probably benefit from those teams trading those players away because they'll have the cap room to take them on.
But they don't have size. See, they don't have size at the center position.
Yeah.
So, like, when you see a guy like Ryan Johansson play, you could see why Columbus took him, because it's hard to contain him on the ice. When you have a center with size, then all of a sudden that really is a matchup problem. So that's another thing to think about too.
Hasn't Strom been compared to Johansson too? Or?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I just don't see that they have the collection up front that they have on defense. So I'd be inclined to take the center, but
I get a feeling that they're going to, even if they're not taking him, they're going to make Toronto think they're going to take him, because you know what I mean. They're going to try to get Toronto to flip those picks. I would think, because if they really are willing to not take him.
And Toronto, hey, right now it's a blank tableau for the Maple Leafs. Right now, they will trade pretty much anything to get what they want. So I mean, other than Morgan Riley, there are no players that are sacrosanct in Toronto. So if they want to be open for business, they will be. So I wouldn't doubt.
They've got cap space room, and why wouldn't Kessel work in Phoenix? You know, I mean,
why wouldn't Kessel work in Nashville? Why wouldn't Kessel work in St.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just saying.
There's a number of places Kessel will work.
Toronto wants, and perhaps there's a deal there to be made. It seems like.
Well, again, I know one thing. Arizona's not trading the number 3 pick. I mean, they might.
No.
Oh yeah, they're not trading the pick, but I'm just talking about in a swap of some kind.
Yeah, I'm sure they can swap and still do okay.
Yeah.
In fact, it might be the wisest thing to do if you could get another asset.
Exactly.
So, because you know, and plus you don't have to make I've talked to GMs who've sat at 2 and said, 2's the easiest place to be because you don't have to make that tough call. You just take the left. And if you're at 4, to me it seems it's the same thing. If you're at 4, it's a much easier pick.
Yeah.
Because.
But sometimes teams trade out, Kev, like with Rick Nash. I mean, once in a while it happens.
Yeah, no, I agree. So
what I was a little surprised at was that after the elimination at the hands of the New York Rangers, that it came pretty quickly that Pittsburgh guaranteed that Rutherford and Mike Johnston would be back, because I think everybody assumed that once they lost that there would be maybe another house cleaning.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too.
I didn't assume that.
Yeah, I just think that was the public sentiment, but it wasn't going to be a guarantee. I mean, look, I'm not the biggest Johnston fan, but he probably deserves another trip back, and I'll tell you why. Because I did see him finally make adjustments in that Rangers series to elongate it. He did. He actually made some good changes in the win that they got, and I have to give him credit for that because I had bashed him a lot. And so I think he's getting at least closer to the learning curve than he was when he started the season. So I don't see why. And Rutherford, I didn't think was going anywhere. I really didn't. The bigger problem is with Pittsburgh's ownership is, will it be the same when the season starts next year, because somebody might sell? Well,
here's the issue. Like, we're always, as fans, and even to lesser extent, but still true in the media, we're just way too flip about the moving of people out. I mean, these are multi-million-dollar businesses.
Yeah.
And they're not run like 4 of us sitting on a podcast,
right?
Saying, well, he should go, he should stay. I mean,
for sure.
Yeah, it's not. It's just not that simple. And these guys all have contracts, and it's real money that's being paid out. And when Rutherford came in, this is the other thing too. People have forgotten this. He said, "Look, he's a caretaker, and he was going to do it for 2 or 3 years." And I think they're going to give him at least the 2 years to figure it out. And I think the biggest thing is the ownership, Mario Lemieux and David Morehouse, know that they were so beat up. Like, Scotty Bowman could not have taken that Penguins team and made it any better down the stretch. Like, there was just nobody there. I mean, Malkin was beat up.
Right.
Clearly, and Kunitz and Perron had gone south, and they're basically 4 of their top 6 defensemen were either out or injured, so they really couldn't be much. So I figured they'd give them 1 more year. Now, the problem is I think we all can see that the issues went beyond the injuries. Like, there's no they just don't have any wingers that can help Malkin and Crosby. I thought the biggest news was, and I think this was important, was Morehouse saying we are not considering abandoning our two-center foundation. So, anybody that thought that they might trade Malkin is obviously mistaken. So I think that was the biggest news that came out of that.
Yeah, despite Rob Rossi's article, which was,
Well, the one thing I would say about Rob Rossi's article is I think he was doing, because I did the same thing. His point is this: if you're gonna change that team, the only way you can do it is by trading Malkin. If you're gonna change it dramatically, you could get a lot for him. It's hard to take trade Letang because of the stroke injury. You're not going to trade Crosby because he's the face of the team. Who else are you going to trade? Like, who has any value on that team?
Yeah. No, it's true. It really is. I mean, there is not much, and coming up, there's not a whole lot of. I mean, Sutter's a valuable player, but he's not a hugely valuable player.
Well, they do have Kasperi Kapanen, right? And I just looked up his numbers. He's got 2 points in 4 playoff games. He'd be 19 next year. They might have to give him a look because the kid can skate, and he is very mature, because of his dad. And I think that's one thing they can do. Another thing that's been a problem for them is, like Derek Pouliot hasn't developed. And they spent a very high pick on him, and he hasn't developed. Dupre, they didn't develop for him. So they've got something going wrong in their system as far as developing defensemen. That's their biggest problem, I think. The wingers might work itself out, but the defense part has been bad. Only Mata aside, because I always felt he was just like a guy you didn't even need to coach. They have trouble getting good defensemen.
Yeah. Well, and Bo Bennett has never been the player they hoped he would be. I mean, they keep penciling him in for 20 goals, and he's not anywhere near that. And they really haven't developed players, just as Russ had said. So. But I think it's even more than I think Kampanen is basically penciled in for next year. I mean, I think they're expecting.
I'm looking at their list, Kevin. You're right. I mean, a lot of their picks have gone by the wayside. They really have. I mean, that's something in that organization where they sort of have to. Rutherford's going to have to revamp that and get their drafting to be a lot better.
Well, there's going to be a great changeover on the blue line because you've got Ehrhoff's an unrestricted free agent. Paul Martin is an unrestricted free agent. You don't know the status of Letang. Scuderi, since he's returned to Pittsburgh, is a shadow of his former self. So I mean, I don't know what. I mean, to me, I think the problems, like Russ said, the problems on the blue line, sort of dwarf what's going on the wing and even in goal. I mean, I don't think that Marc-Andre Fleury's play is anywhere close to being the biggest problem with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think it's the defense.
He was really good. The last 2 games, he was better than even he was last year. He was really good.
Yeah.
No, I think that's the fine. I mean, they like Hornquist too. So they got, if you look at it going forward, they got Hornquist and they got Kapanen that they believe in.
Right.
Kapanen is not quite ready for prime time, but I think he's ready to play on the team.
Yeah.
And then it just comes down to, who's going to, what kind of season. Is Kunitz completely done, or did he just have a slump? And is Perron, again, is he completely done, or did he just go south? I mean, there's a lot of questions there. But I think the defense, with Mata coming back next season, if Letang's concussion problem is not long-term, Letang was having he was Letang plus this season. He was having an exceptional season. So, those are 2 good guys. And Pouliot, Russ, what do you think? Don't you think at some point he's going to take a step up in his development?
He'll take a step forward offensively. I've never been a fan of his defense. For a guy his size, he just doesn't use his body well and even takes good positioning. I've never been a fan of that, and that's why I didn't even understand why they drafted him in the spot they did, because I looked at him as strictly an offensive guy.
Yeah, and now they've got Ian Cole, who played really, really well for them down the stretch. I think that's the best thing that happened to Ian Cole, is to get over to the Penguins, where they've given him an opportunity. And I think he and Lovejoy are really competent 5'6" guys. So I think I disagree a little bit. I think their defense will be okay, if as long as Letang is okay, because I think Mata is a real premium player. And I guess a lot will depend on the development of Pouliot and what sort of veteran guy they can find out there to play in the 3-hole. I don't think there's any chance that they'll keep Ehrhoff and probably not Martin either. So they're gonna have to find someone else to slot in there.
Let's move on quickly to this because I want to get to the other things too. The Senators and Canadian series, of course, we have to let's touch on that as well. This it turned into a heck of a series. It did. It really did. And it was the Sens were so close to tying that game last night. That was insane. I mean, that was like the tip that Bobby Ryan had. That to me was the save of the year for Carey Price. I mean, it's hard to see it, but on the one angle you saw that Bobby Ryan had he's struggled heartily. Bobby Ryan has, of course, but that tip was a beautiful tip, and it goes right under the arm of Price. I mean, most goalies, that's through the arm. There's no question about it. Price is the only goalie in the NHL that gets his arm closed that quickly for that reflex and to make that save, or else that game's tied up, and we're probably going back to Montreal for what could have been a disastrous situation for the game.
I mean, Price was Price, and we knew that he was going to be, if the Canadians were going to win this series, he was going to be the difference. But the questioning about the Habs came to the forefront at the end of the series. They had one goal in Game 5 and one goal without the goal he pulled in Game 6. So, I mean, the concerns of regarding the Habs, I mean, whoever wins Detroit and Tampa, I think will have the advantage against Montreal because I think both of them can score, and I still don't think Montreal can consistently.
I think both. And that brings us to Detroit, who was shockingly up 3-1.
Wait, can I say something about Montreal real quick?
Yeah, please do, Russ.
It doesn't even matter that Pacioretty is there, not there. They get production from a million guys. It's not a lot of production, but they get it, and they are a fast skating team. And Subban intimidates most players in the NHL. He's the most intimidating guy on the blue line in these playoffs that I've seen, anyhow. Yeah. And Price is the best goalie. And when you have that combination, you're in every game. And while Ottawa made it a series, yesterday I was on the radio when that game was first period shutout, and I knew Carey Price was getting a shutout because he now looks like that guy that I watched in the AHL where he won a Calder Cup there. He has that same look this year, and it's going to be really hard to beat that guy.
Oh, big time. And Ottawa gave everything they had, and Anderson was quite the story. I mean,
that was really Ottawa's first time that they were shut out all season. By the way, they had never been shut out the whole season.
Wow, I didn't realize that. That's something. Yeah. So, Price was just fantastic, and there were 4 or 5 chances down the stretch there that were just crazy. And that Price, Ottawa, we'd seen Ottawa come back and score that goal. We were just waiting. We were waiting for them to score that goal yesterday, I think, and they, and they didn't. That was that. Which does bring us to Detroit, Kevin. We're going tonight, and holy cow, this series is just shocking to me.
Yeah, it really surprised me too. The last 3 games, the Red Wings have been by far the better team. And I know they had that 7-minute mini collapse after Glendening, had to leave the game to have his thumb stitched up, but they have been really impressive. They've just played a very solid all-around defensive game. That last shutout was a team shutout, not a Mrazek shutout. The first shutout was a Mrazek shutout, but that was just a team game. Like the neutral zone looks like Tokyo at rush hour. There's just bodies everywhere. And, it's just you can't get through it. They're back checking like no one I've seen in a very long time. And I know the television analysts have paid tribute to that, but it is just amazing. Like you watching them, and that you could sense that the Lightning are trying to make plays quicker than they normally do because they know there's a guy coming right up their tailpipe, and it's just been very impressive. And the Red Wings are getting the secondary scoring. They had a goal from Miller last game. They had a goal from Sheehan. So it's not all on Datsuk and Zetterberg and Nyquist and Tatar. Meanwhile, the Lightning, much to my surprise, Stamkos, still doesn't have a goal. Now he has 18 shots on goal. That's like a normal amount for him. So Mrazek's playing a role in that, but he also doesn't seem to be getting the prime chances that he usually gets. He's those real in the slot shots that he has through traffic that just seem to find the upper corners. The Red Wings have done a good job of denying him those type of shots. So it's been an impressive run. I guess I'm still waiting for the Lightning to play their best game, but I thought it was really meaningful that the beginning of the series, the Lightning, even when they lost, said, well, we just didn't play well. After the last game, Stamkos paid homage to how well the Red Wings are playing, and I thought, that's interesting, because before they just talked about how they weren't playing well. Now they're talking about how well Detroit is playing. So it'll be a fun game. Like all the Lightning have to do is turn on their best game, and suddenly we're going to go to a Game 7. So it's still, to me, a toss-up. But the Red Wings have been impressive.
I'm wondering whether we're going to hear something after this series, depending on who wins, related to what happened with Malkin, where there was an admission of an injury after the series. Because the way Stamkos is playing, I'll grant you, he has the 18 shots. He's still getting opportunities, but he doesn't seem to be the Steven Stamkos that we've seen, in the even in his first playoff when they played, I think it was 2011 when they played against the Bruins. He was, even as a young player, he played pretty decently. He came back injured last year and wasn't even his whole self. This year, there doesn't seem to be any injury coming into the playoffs, but he's just not making the impact. And the only game that they, that 7 minutes, that 7 minute comeback that they had in Game 4, that was all Tyler Johnson. It wasn't Stamkos.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, their power play disappeared too. Now, I will tell you that about a month ago, Babcock really challenged the Red Wings in Philly and said, hey, we had the best penalty kill all year, now it stinks, and now it seems to be back to being the best. And I think that's a factor. And but there's something to be said about Babcock out-coaching Cooper, because I think he's really schooling him right now, because otherwise it is sort of inexplicable how Tampa is not leading in this series.
Yeah, it really is.
If people want to understand why Babcock is a great coach, you can sort of see it with this team now.
Yeah.
And what I would say is that Ray Ferraro wasn't anywhere to be seen on this team, and at the end of the season, Mike Babcock woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to put Ray Ferraro, I'm going to bring him up.
Landon Ferraro.
Landon Ferraro, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring Landon Ferraro up and put him on the fourth line, and he's had a great run. He's been a very impressive player, and he's helped out. And Glendening is another guy. Babcock liked him right away, decided he was going to be a difference maker, inserted him on the penalty kill, put him in important situations. And the guys they have out at the end of those, when they're defending a one-goal lead, is Ferraro and Glendening and Drew Miller. So Babcock has a good feel for his personnel, and that's where he really has an advantage. And he also is very good at matching up. He's in Tampa Bay. He did switches to try to get his guys out, even though he didn't have the last change, and he split up Datsuk and Zetterberg. He's moved guys around in order to get the proper matchup. So he is pulling all the levers.
And they sent Drouin down. Drouin played one playoff game, and then they sent him to Syracuse. I mean, that's a lot of that speed that during the regular season kept teams uneasy. But once you took him out, that sort of helped Detroit a little bit too.
And the excuse that in terms of Tampa's power play, I mean, the excuse that Jason Garrison not being there adversely affected. Well, Garrison's played the last 2 games, and if he's back, then that excuse is out the window. So I mean, they their back is against the wall tonight. I think they need a big performance out of Ben Bishop. I think he's been pedestrian at best. I don't think he really stood on his head. And if he isn't standing on it, I mean, if he's at least the equal of Mrazek, then I think that Tampa Bay has the chance to win the Game 6 and go to Game 7. But if they get a performance out of Mrazek like they have been, this series is over with, Russ.
He has to be the equal of Mrazek. He has a Vezina, right? I mean,
well, he hasn't
been the series. I get it, and I like Mrazek. But I thought with no playoff experience that the Red Wings were in trouble, because down the stretch between him and Howard, I saw there being a problem with their goaltending, and miraculously, goaltending has not been the Red Wings' problem, and that's unbelievable to me.
Yep, me too.
Yeah, we lost Eck there for a second, so
let's talk about the Islanders.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's 28 years ago. We had another big Game 7, and that one went 7 periods, and Patty LaFontaine, scored a goal. It's memorable in my life because I actually, even though I lived in Washington, D.C. and was USA Today's hockey writer, or I lived just outside Washington, D.C., I didn't go to the game because my wife was 2 weeks overdue for our second child. But when history was being made, and I could sense it. I thought it could, break the Mud Bruneto record. I thought this one was going to go 7 extra periods. So I got in my car and I drove to the arena and got there just before the start of the 4th overtime. So about the time I settled into my seat is when Pat LaFontaine, scored the goal. I went down, did the interviews, drove to the USA Today office, wrote up my story, and then heard from my wife that she was ready to go to the hospital. So, drove there, and my daughter was born, and everybody said I should have named her Patty after Pat LaFontaine, but I didn't. I named her Kelsey. But, very meaningful game. I talked to Doc Emmerich about that, too, today, because everyone remembers that, Billy Clement took his shirt off and tied his tie around his head, and then, of course, he came back for the 4th overtime, and he was all dressed up again because ESPN officials had called him and said, "Yeah, I don't think so." But what Doc Emmerich told me, which I thought was kind of fun, is it was really only one person at ESPN that objected, and he actually got a bottle of champagne from one of the from members of the hierarchy, saying, I understand what protocol is, but nonetheless, here's a bottle of champagne because it was pretty funny shtick. So, I don't know if this game can match that one for pure drama. I think, what do you remember about it? Russ, was that 72 saves for Kelly Rudy and that? Something like that.
Yeah, it was something insane, and I lived on the island at the time, so people, all I heard about was Kelly Rudy. People, I knew someone that named their dog Rudy after that series. Like, his legend grew, like, unbelievable after that, and so, yeah, I remember that. I got to say, though, tonight I think it's all about Holtby and Halak, and I think it's very hard when the Islanders come off an emotional win the way they did, because you knew they weren't losing Game 6 at the Coliseum. Everybody knew that. But now you've got to bring that emotion back, and I think it's going to be hard for them to do that against the Caps. I really don't give them a lot of, I give them a fighter's chance, but I really do expect the Caps to win this one.
Yeah, I expect Ovechkin to step up. I mean, he hasn't been the disappearing act that he has been in previous playoffs. This year I think he's played pretty well, and I think that the additions that they made in the offseason, bringing in the Orpiks and the Niskanens, bringing in some playoff experience, has really helped that team, has really solidified them. I picked the Caps in 7, so I'm sticking with that prediction.
I actually picked the Islanders in 7 with Tavares scoring an overtime goal. So
that's right, you did.
So that will be interesting to see. I'm looking for John T to step up tonight, and I think he will. He seems to be feeling the flag carrier role that he has here. Him pumping up the crowd, I thought was kind of fun in that last game.
Yeah, I can see Kuznetsov stepping up. He's a guy that's been gradually getting better as the series has gone on and had a real good season, and so he's a guy you really have to watch. And then when I really think about this game, I say, you know what? I know everybody's looking at Ovechkin, but I think it's going to be the Islanders' young defense that's going to get exploited, whether they're using Reinhart or somebody like that. That's going to be a little bit of a weakness for them without Hamonic. I think ultimately that's what's going to do the Islanders in.
That's pretty incredible. You know what? It's this is a. Someone told me that this is the first game that these coaches have ever coached in a Game 7. I was trying to look this up. Like, both of these guys, 21 years. Is that true?
I mean, I could tell you for sure Capuano hasn't.
Yeah, I thought Trotz had gone to Game 7, but
no.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Trotz.
Yeah, I think he went to Game 6 a couple times, but not.
Yeah,
7.
I guess that's pretty crazy. 21 years. First Game 7s for both these guys.
Well, I mean, he obviously, Trotz had an expansion team. They really didn't do much playoff hunting when you think about it. And Capuano's been with the Islanders, so.
I covered a Game 7. I think it was a Game 7, right, Eck, with the Flyers, and the Flyers won that game. Like maybe it was R.J. Umberger or somebody like that.
Oh yeah.
I covered
I remember that game really well. It was down in Washington, wasn't it?
It was in Washington, so they're used to. They've had. I know they went to 7 against the Rangers, right? They've had some Game 7.
They haven't had very much luck at home in Game 7.
No.
Two and 7. 2 and 7 at home in Game 7s, and I think 3 and 9 overall in Game 7s.
Yeah.
These are one of these stats where there's no relevance to this.
There is no relevance, but I will give you a stat that doesn't have relevance. Okay. Because this is especially because we have Josh on today. I had to show you this. Have you heard about the South African goalie, Rush, yet?
No, I have not.
I'm losing my mind, guys. Sorry. It was that kind of weekend here. All right. Ashley Bach. Okay. He's 6'8", 340. All right. Here he is in goal. This is a picture of him here, so I can show you. I'm just going to put this up here. Here we go. Ashley Bach, 6'8", 340, playing in South Africa for the South African team. That's a big goalie.
Doesn't matter. Can
No?
he
Russ,
matter?
that would be like former New York Knicks Zach Randolph playing goal.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of reminds me of Sean Bradley. Like, Sean Bradley was this great big center that the 76ers drafted. Problem was he couldn't play. This guy's got to be able to move laterally. Just that size and the girth isn't enough.
He can literally play on his knees, though, and be perfectly fine.
We don't know if he could be fine. That's the thing. The speed factor is what I would worry about, and I would have to say he's not playing against guys that have the high speed factor where he's got to cover a wraparound or something like that.
Right.
At top speed.
Anyway,
He does have knee pads.
6'8", 340. Pretty good. All right, guys, that's all the time we have. Enjoy the games tonight. Gosh, one game 6, one game 7, perhaps a game 7 tomorrow night. Doesn't get any better than that. So enjoy. Yeah, I too, but I didn't put my thoughts in. I think Detroit's going to finish this off tonight, and I actually think the Islanders are going to take this back. I think the Islanders are going to win this one. So that's my thoughts on this one. But we'll see you soon, guys. Without the buzz, remember, it is just hockey. Talk to you then.